Hello, I'm Lisa Morris. I'm an independent consultant with Funston Advisory Services and a contributor to Board Smart. I have with me today Carol Nolan Drake to talk about the importance of balance for boards of trustees. She served as a trustee on the Ohio Public Employees Retirement System Board and then became a senior staff member. So she's seen the board function from different perspectives. She's the founder of Carlo Consulting. She does federal lobbying for pension funds and assists clients in engagement and gaining transparency in public companies. I'm going to turn it over to Carol and ask her to fill in the blanks about her background, but also to give us an overview of her experience with the OPERS Board of Trustees. Carol.
Thank you, Lisa, and good morning. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today about this really important topic, that of balance on a board of trustees. When I was appointed the Ohio Director of Administrative Services by Governor Taft, one of the major responsibilities was to serve on the OPERS board as the statutory board member. And I felt that that was extremely important, so important that I decided that I would attend all the meetings and not send a designee, as some other directors have, rightly done. And that was very important to me. I was a woman on a board that was full of lots of men, very experienced and seasoned board members. But I wanted to bring my perspective of state and local government, my experience as an attorney, and certainly as a female to the board. I enjoyed it thoroughly. And so when my time at the end of the administration concluded, I was very pleased to be offered an opportunity a few months later to start in the corporate governance area and help OPERS manage all of its investments from the perspective of proxy voting and corporate governance. So that was my first opportunity to really work at the pension system and still interact with the board, but of course in a very different way.
Carol, you came in as the new person without board experience, and you have told us that you joined a very experienced board that had been through the entire board calendar and knew what was ahead and knew the very specialized body of knowledge that goes with running a pension. What was an effective process for you to find your voice? You mentioned that you were very keen on bringing your perspective of how government runs. How did you find your voice?
Well, that's a great question. I had served on a number of nonprofit boards before, but serving on a pension board as a trustee and in a fiduciary capacity is a heavy lift, certainly. One of the great things that OPERS did is they had a very good orientation program. They had board training. I actually had 2 full days of training, a meeting with the executive director at the time, and then several members of the leadership team to go over issues before the board meetings even started for me. And then every month we would receive our board packets. And back then, they were in these big, notebooks. I read everything. I read everything that I could. I asked questions. I felt very supported in the board meeting by the chair and the other board members because, I was new. And so I had questions about the process, why things were on the agenda at that point in time. And those were kind of the, questions that a rookie would ask, right? Because all the other board members had been there long enough to see that progression of how things go in a pension world and when a board makes a decision about something. But they were very tolerant of that. That's another reason for balance, right? They allowed me the opportunity to ask the questions I needed to feel comfortable going forward, and then certainly being ready to vote when the chairman would call for a vote.
Well, you did your homework, which is extremely important. And you served on what I guess I would call a multidisciplinary board because the statutory framework is that board members come from a variety of areas. And What was your experience with the multidisciplinary board, and how did that um, either improve or detract from the synergy that boards need to work effectively?
Well, it is a multidisciplinary board. You know, boards are made up of elected and appointed board members. But, you know, when the door closes and the chair gavels the meeting to begin, we all act as fiduciaries. And we might want to think about retirees, of course, or think about members, you know, newly in their careers. That is part of that intergenerational balance that boards need to consider. We also need to consider employer perspectives and stakeholder perspectives. So it's up to the executive director and the leadership team, and certainly the board being prepared to discuss all that in that open meeting and make sure that we have the information we need to make the decisions we need to, and then to take a pause. You know, it's okay to say we need to extend this to the next meeting. You know, the board has more questions about it, or we need some research on a particular matter. So you do have to use your voice. You should never feel that because a vote has been called that you have to vote at that moment. Certainly the board can go forward with the vote, I understand that, but I always wanted to make sure I was prepared and able to take the time necessary to understand these, you know, pretty complex issues.
Yes, pensions have some very important issues to deal with. You mentioned your board chair, and your board chair was supportive. Can you speak to the importance of the role of that board chair and leadership, and even the executive director, and how that adds to the positive dynamic of a board?
You know, I'd be glad to. You know, between the board chair and the CEO or executive director, you know, those are two very critical positions. And both of them need to work well together because we, as other board members, are depending on them to tee up the agenda every month. We need to make sure that if we're on a committee, and there, you know, boards have many committees that operate, and then that committee work goes up to the full board. It's up to the chair to make sure that the agenda and the protocols are followed so that we are moving through these very, you know, important items. And we also needed a chair that would welcome this kind of, you know, diverse discussion that is necessary. And the chair at the time was very tolerant, as I said, and interested in my feedback and my perspective. So that was tremendous. And I also had a great relationship with the CEO as well, because, you know, you had to understand that these are the people in place who know more than I do, and certainly at the time that I did. And I wanted to understand their perspective, give them the respect that they deserved, but they also knew I had some questions, and so it was a real back and forth, a give and take. Again, that's where the balance comes in.
You mentioned the expertise of the CEO or the executive director and the importance of that. One of the things that I observed for board members is how overwhelming it is to come onto a board where there are highly experienced people that deal with complex principles, actuarial principles, funding principles, customer service for an elderly population as well as a very young population. So there are so many different issues that require tremendous expertise. It's hard, I think, coming onto a board and really understanding that you don't have to know everything. You really, if I had a model for a good board member, it would be a well-educated generalist that understands the lay of the land and understands how to have the best people at the table and understands how to ask questions and to listen. And it sounds like that was your approach. I don't know whether that was conscious or unconscious.
Well, there's probably a little of both. I mean, I always recognized I was not an investment expert. I was not an actuary either. I have great regard for actuaries and the investment team. I don't know how they do what they do. I would have trouble sleeping at night if I was watching the stock market, or some investment portfolio every day. So I trusted them. I mean, this is the thing. You have to learn, and I think part of this is my legal training. You do the research that you can, you read everything, you try and ask the right questions. At some point, you're going to have a recommendation come from either an actuary or um, another board member who thinks that this is an important way for the board to take action. And you have to have a trust level that it's the right decision to make. And I certainly did have that trust level. I'd done everything that I could do to be educated on that particular issue. And when you had a vote taken and you had a really comprehensive look around the room of the board members in support, it always made me feel that, I'd made the right decision.
Well, and it sounds like this doesn't just happen. This takes work.
Right.
It takes work on the part of several people. We know that board diversity is a very significant corporate governance issue, certainly in the investment world. But board diversity is an issue for public pensions. And I just would like to hear your perspective on this. I see the issue of balance as another perspective on diversity. It's not just having a seat at the table. It's full participation.
You're right. And one of the challenges for public funds, honestly, is the mix of appointed and elected members on the board. And certainly the COVID pandemic has caused concerns about gaining signatures to even run for some of these, seats that are elected by the membership. I think the board has a role to play here in identifying people within their membership base that would be good candidates, who are diverse candidates. And I also think the membership too needs to think about how to find good candidates who are willing to run and then help support them in that role. Not all board members run every single time. So there is an opportunity at times for a new candidate to come up without having any, kind of internal competition for that seat. And I think that we can do a better job helping board members or even potential board members understand the requirements for the position, how to be nominated and then elected or even appointed to a position. We know in Ohio there are many elected officials that make those appointments, and I think it's an important conversation to have with them about looking at the resumes that are coming into them and helping them find these diverse candidates for the position. So I think there's work on many levels to help increase that particular diversity. As you mentioned, that balance really does show up in reports and studies that a more diverse board will make better decisions over time and can ultimately have greater returns. And let's face it, the returns that public pensions earn on their investments support the members and retirees. So that's really what it's all about.
Well, I couldn't agree more, Carol. As I used to say, it's absolutely the right work, the good work to be doing, not just for your local and state economy, but for all of your members and retirees. So I hear you saying that you do your homework. Mm-hmm. It doesn't just happen. And you don't shy away from asking questions and asking the hard questions. And you don't shy away from those questions because you think you know less. Every board member has a perspective that is important. So I don't know if you think there's a formula for this or whether this depends on the people at the table. I don't know what you would recommend.
It's probably, again, a little bit of both. I mean, I know that my own experience and being an attorney too, you're in the courtroom and you're meeting with clients and you ask lots of questions. And even today, I am the person who always seems to go up to the open microphone in conferences and meetings or even in Zoom calls and ask questions. I just have all these questions I love to ask. And so that may be just part of my own DNA. But I also think too, it's important for the chair, as the chair looks around the room before a vote or after a presentation, it's up to the chair to say, are there any questions? Anyone have anything else you want to ask? And make sure that there is an opportunity for an individual to speak out. And you don't have to speak out every time. You don't have to have a question for every presenter. I mean, I'm not suggesting that at all. But when you do have questions, you should be able to ask them. And let's face it, I mean, the people that I worked with on the board and the board members I know today, public and private company side, they're not shrinking violets. They are dedicated people who do their homework and ask questions. But as we think about more diverse candidates who may not have had the exposure to even a nonprofit board or other boards, we need to help them feel comfortable in that space. It's not easy to ask a question and you feel like people think it's a stupid question. But haven't we all said, the only stupid questions are the ones that don't get asked. And everybody benefits from the answer, right? So even if you take a couple more minutes for a question, it's probably a good answer for everyone to hear.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. Thank you very much. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you would like to add? We've touched on a lot of things. Do your homework, speak up, don't be shy. We've touched on the role of leadership and how important it is to create a climate where everyone is important and has a perspective that could be valuable. So what have we left that you would like to say?
Well, again, I want to say how much that service on the board and then working on the leadership team meant to me. It was so important. I remember making an offer to an individual to join my team, and I said, are you ready to join the big leagues? Because we had 1 million members, behind us that we were supporting. What we said and did, either as a board member or then on the leadership team, to me, I felt was amplified on behalf of all these people. And today in my work, I am very honored to go to Washington and talk on behalf of retirees and members. I feel like that we are doing such important work with regard to retirement security and then healthcare for retirees. So it makes my job so much easier because I truly believe in the value of a defined benefit plan and that retirement security. So I would say to anyone interested in a board appointment or running for a board, I mean, you will have such regard for the work, and it really could be one of the most important positions that you have. And it's unpaid too. That's the other piece of it. These people do this work without being paid, and that tells me that they have a real commitment for the future, not just for now, but they're thinking about 50 years down the road. And that is, I would say that would be very important. It was important to me. It's a good reason to get involved now.
Well, very well said. Thank you, Carol. It really is the good work and very rewarding. So I appreciate your comments today, and I appreciate you sitting for this interview and adding some very important points for thought. Thank you very much.
Yeah, well, thank you, Lisa. I appreciate it.